we also introduced a feature called Chainlocks, where not only would the masternodes vote on specific transactions, but they would also vote on the final block that was produced. And if a quorum of 400 masternodes, 60% of that quorum voted in favor of the block, that was considered final, and there could not be any reorganizations below that. You couldn't remove that block from the chain. It was final.
And now to round out this series on proof of work versus proof of stake and hybrids, I spoke with Pasta, a core developer for Dash. Now, Dash is an interesting case because it started as a fully mined proof of work coin and then added some other elements, giving some of the block reward to a new set of nodes called masternodes, kind of pioneered the masternode concept, but it was still entirely proof of work for most of its existence up until about 2018 or 2019 or so. That's when a technology called Chainlocks was implemented that basically used the masternode network, the staked network as it were, for a security model. And then since then, there was a reallocation, which kind of put the rewards a little bit more in favor of masternodes, kind of similar to what happened in Decred, although significantly less dramatic. And while the two systems do kind of have a lot of similarities from the bird's eye view, there's a lot of difference in how they were actually implemented. And so I figured I might as well chat with Pasta to round this whole thing out. So enjoy the chat. So, hey everyone, I have the fantastic pleasure of speaking with, once again, the one and only Pasta, core developer for Dash Core Team. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you, Joel?
I'm doing fantastic. I mean, I definitely wanted to get your perspective on this stuff because over the past few episodes, I've been really delving into the proof of work versus proof of stake system, which I kind of feel like over the years, the debate has kind of been mostly just people just saying what they personally prefer or making arguments that make each side feel better, but not really like a get to the bottom of things. And also, it was mostly a proof of work dominated world. Now I think it's more of a proof of stake dominated world now that Ethereum switched over. And so it'd be kind of interesting to see, where we're at now, and especially since Dash for the last few years has had a hybrid consensus model. I guess, there was always the masternode system, but that was for extra stuff. Now it's actually like for consensus. And so, it'd be interesting to kind of delve into this kind of stuff and see kind of where we're at with that. So would you mind really quickly going over for the viewers at home, people might maybe less familiar than me, just going up over Dash's basic system, like what are masternodes, what is a masternode miner split like, etc.
Yeah. So Dash was originally really a completely proof of work coin. That was the only thing that really affected consensus and miners proposed blocks, and the chain continued just like in Bitcoin. Over time, we introduced the concept of masternodes pretty early on, actually, where anyone with 1,000 Dash was able to run a masternode, and those masternodes were able to do different services. Originally, I think the only thing, and this is before I was here, so I could have a couple of things wrong, but originally they were really only used for mixing or private send or coin join or whatever you want to call it. And over time, they ended up, a new feature was introduced called instant send, where for a fee, you could have a subset of the masternode network to basically look at your transaction and vouch for you and say, yes, this is the first transaction that we saw spending this output, and we are going to vouch that this will be confirmed in a block in the near future. And that gave merchants confidence to accept the transaction instantly, hence the name instant send. And we introduced kind of a soft consensus rule with that said that any block that tries to conflict with an instant send lock should be marked as invalid. And so if a miner proposed a new block and that block spent the transaction, spent a UTXO that was instant send locked, and it wasn't the transaction that was instant send locked, the block would be rejected. And so that gave us really pretty good guarantees that an instance unlock was mostly final, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't really have any issues with it. We later introduced long-living masternode quorums that were significantly more efficient due to using um, BLS signatures and some new techniques for kind of how we generated the signatures. And that enabled us to expand instant send to every single transaction. Originally, it was only opt-in, and there was a significant fee. And then some transactions got automatic locking, and then we went to
Mm-hmm.
everything, and everything got instant send locked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been that way for multiple years now. When we introduced um, the instant send for everyone kind of feature, we also introduced a feature called Chainlocks, where not only would the masternodes vote on specific transactions, but they would also vote on the final block that was produced. And if a quorum of 400 masternodes, 60% of that quorum voted in favor of the block, that was considered final, and there could not be any reorganizations uh, below that. You couldn't remove that block from the chain, it was final.
Yeah. So
Uh,
basically, what that equates to is no, pretty much no 51% attacks, where you get more than half of the miners or the miner hash rate and start trying to reverse transactions. Essentially, that's not real. That's not realistically possible right now, unless you also own like a good chunk, like half of the master nodes. Is that right?
Exactly. If as long as the LLMQs are continuing to form chain locks, 51% attacks and secret mining are just not possible.
Yeah. It's so a lot of people have sort of categorized something like this as like a proof of stake system, where, compared to proof of work, where it's miners decide, whereas proof of stake, stakers decide. And how does, I've heard obviously the Masternode system has been sort of categorized as a proof of service system, not quite, like a little hair split away from proof of stake. How does that substantially differ from proof of stake?
Well, one of the big things is that in proof of stake, generally there is a singular proposer that is selected to propose the next block, and then everyone votes on it. And there are many variants of proof of stake, so this is not for every system. But somehow a block is proposed by the stakers, and then it is voted on by the stakers. Currently in Dash, really the power of the miners is just to propose the next block. Um, and so they propose the next block, and it gets accepted into the chain. And then about a second and a half later, the masternodes agree with that block and chain lock it, and it becomes final.
Yeah, so it seems like the with a pure proof of stake system, you have the same pool of entities, right, which are the same method, which is both proposing the blocks and then deciding on their validity. Whereas with a system like this, you have miners who propose the block, but then stakers, not really stakers, masternodes in this case, then decide on the validity of the block. First off, is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also, what are kind of the benefits of using a system such as this, or like, I guess the major differences of doing this versus something that's pure one way or pure the other, and then like what are the main differences, and then if you think there's a particular benefit or wisdom in doing things this way.
Yeah, there are a couple of terms that kind of describe um, the properties of a blockchain, and one of
Mm-hmm.
those is liveness guarantees. And proof of work does incredibly good at liveness guarantees. It is impossible to stop proof of work. As long as one miner is mining somewhere, the chain will continue and it'll keep moving forward. And then I forget what the exact term is, but basically the next property is safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when you see a block, how confident are you that it will be the block? And so a lot of times in Bitcoin, if you try and submit, you know, deposit money to an exchange or something like that, it'll probably take six confirmations, maybe two, maybe only even one, but that's pretty rare. A lot of times six. And that is because in Bitcoin you don't have safety guarantees. You have incredibly good liveness guarantees, but you never know if a block is going to be the final block or if it's going to get reorganized out of the blockchain. Even, you know, the big problem with proof of work is 51% attacks, and if the even if the chain continues 100 blocks, all of that could get reorganized away, and you have absolutely no safety guarantees. You do get kind of a probabilistic safety as
Yeah.
you get more and more blocks. You can become more confident that it's not going to get reorganized, but you never know for sure. You absolutely never. There's just no possible way to know for sure that this block is never going to get reorganized.
Hmm.
Um, Proof of stake has the opposite issue, where its liveness guarantees are quite low, but its safety guarantees are quite high. If you see a block, you know that that block is final, and there is nothing within the rules of the system that can invalidate that block. It is final.
Hmm.
Whereas liveness is a lot worse. If generally, if a third of the validators or the stakers or whatever you call them in your system go offline, you lose liveness completely, and the system just stops. And that's generally referred to as a chain halt.
Hmm.
And Dash kind of has a middle ground there where we have better liveness guarantees than a proof of stake system, but we have better safety guarantees than a proof of work system. And so if you see a chain lock, you know with 100% certainty that that is the final block. And if you don't see a chain lock, you should be pretty cautious, but you start getting some probabilistic security, and you can get
Hmm.
some confidence that it probably won't be reorganized, but you never know, just like in any other system. And so generally, you want to wait for a chain lock to know for sure that this block is final and it's not going to be reorganized. In fact, major exchanges for Dash, they really only care about chain locks. And you could
Hmm.
have 100 confirmations, but if there's not a chain lock there, they're probably not going to accept your transaction. But processing still continues during that time where chain locks are not active for whatever reason. So to recap, proof of work, really good liveness, bad safety. Proof of stake, bad liveness, but really good safety. And Dash is almost the best of both worlds, except you kind of have the costs of both.
Of course. Now, a couple things that might not be in people's top of mind awareness on this whole thing is first off that kind of bombshell that pure proof of work is never permanent. And I know this flies in the face of a lot of Bitcoin Twitter, where you have a lot of people just saying like everything's permanent in the time chain or whatever, and it talking about the permanence of Bitcoin, but then you could essentially, with enough hash rate, roll things back to a significant degree. On the other side, uh, basically, if large portions of the proof of stake network go offline, even if it's not the entire network, if just a good chunk of it just gets taken out, then the whole chain grinds to a halt. Is that correct?
Yes, but you could actually think about that as being a benefit more than it is a
Mm-hmm.
downside. If you think of something like Bitcoin, and let's just say you are, accepting Bitcoin transactions in um, China or in Iran or some country like that, or maybe even Turkey or anywhere, and that country decides that we're going to block all Bitcoin traffic. Nothing's
Mm-hmm.
coming in, nothing's coming out. If there's a
Mm-hmm.
miner in that jurisdiction, the chain will continue. You might get one confirmation on your transaction, you might get two confirmations, you might get six, you might get 25 confirmations on your transaction. But you don't realize that the Bitcoin network outside of your country actually has gotten 500 blocks or
Mm-hmm.
just one more block than your chain has. You have absolutely no way of realizing that unless maybe you notice like, hey, blocks are taking a long time or something like that, but you don't have any guarantee at all that your chain is the correct chain. And so you could go for days or weeks, maybe, or even months or years without realizing that your Bitcoin blockchain is now different than the one that the rest of the world sees. And so having the network just go offline and you don't see anything can actually be a good thing because you don't have a false sense of security.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And in both cases, it seems like we're talking about uh, obviously we're trying to run networks under ideal circumstances. Everything should be working, but sometimes things go catastrophically wrong. And in the case of 51% attacks that I've seen in the past with proof of work chains, essentially you got to sort of wait till the storm blows over to use the network because you don't know if everything's going to get reversed because it's under an active 51% attack. So you got to kind of like wait it out. And with a proof of stake network, the chain goes down. You can't use it. And so would it be a fair characterization to say that with like a hybrid system such as what Dash uses, even when you're under something pretty terrible going on, it's you could theoretically just cautiously continue to transact. For example, if you're in a 51% attack situation on the hash rate, but Chainlocks is still locking in the correct blocks, you could still use the network. Or on the other side, if two-thirds, three-quarters of masternodes just got taken down by whatever, you could now cautiously keep using the main network, the proof of work network. Even though yeah, you're taking more risks, it's still a lot easier than a pure proof of work or proof of stake system to just keep resuming business as usual. Is that a correct assessment, do you think?
Yeah, yeah, that's the main benefit of having Dash's hybrid system is that even when one side of the system is having difficulties or being attacked or something like that, the other side will continue, and either the chain will just continue, but you have no guarantees, you have no safety or security guarantees, or you don't have safety, or someone's trying to attack the proof of work blockchain, but Chainlocks just completely invalidates those attacks.
Yeah, no, I've seen back in the day, of course, there was a lot of cost of 51% attack calculator kind of things out there back when that was the predominant way crypto chains were run. And if you look at those, what they say, they were never updated for Dash with Chainlocks, obviously. But when you look at it, the cost to attack the Dash network on a purely proof of work side seems to be relatively cheap. Whereas then if you think about the cost of compromising the Masternode network by, controlling a significant portion of the funds and turning those into masternodes, it's astronomically higher. So do you think that the proof of work component, as far as we're talking about the block rewards, do you think that deserves to be reduced? I know that it already has been. The non-treasury portion of Dash was 50-50 in the past and is now 60% masternode, 40% miner. Decred was 60% miner, 30% staker, and then the rest treasury. And then they took the 60% and put it all the way down to 10% recently. So what do you think of the prospects of reducing the miner component to just sort of not overpay for the wrong part of security?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. It's one that does need a lot of consideration. But when you look at the value, the actual service that miners are providing, the only real service, as compared to like a proof of stake system, is that when the proof of stake side of the network goes down, when the masternodes go down, the chain continues. That is the main advantage. That's really the only benefit that I see. Some might say that there's another advantage that the masternodes are not the one proposing the transaction that go into a block. They just agree or disagree. They don't actually say what's in the block. They just agree or disagree. And so those are really the only two things that miners are doing. And how valuable is that? Almost all of the value that gets sent to miners gets spent on electricity costs and doesn't stay within the network. It generally gets spent on electricity. That's what a proof of work system will do. If there's a profit margin to make, people will buy hardware and they'll spend extra on electricity and will drive the electricity costs up. And so eventually a proof of work system will reach the point where there's zero profitability, roughly. when you account for like the cost of acquisition of hardware and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of basic economics. Um, and so I think there is a very interesting discussion there of what is the value to the network to not have the masternodes be the ones that propose what transactions get included and not have that liveness guarantee. I don't really know how valuable that is. To me, it's probably not 40% of block reward valuable, um, but I don't know what percentage it should be. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, so there's also the spending on electricity part is kind of part of a component of what some people would even call an advantage for mining, which is that the funds circulate, that it's not the same entities that have it end up just accruing more and more and it becomes centralized or whatever. Although, obviously, in a more mature ecosystem with a well distributed supply and a whole bunch of different people using it and a lot of market demand and exchanges, etc., it's less of an issue. But at least with a 10%, like with a certain minor component, you have constant selling, which may or may not be good for the price, but it is good for getting it out there into the ecosystem. And so there's that too. Now, as far as like, yeah, so go ahead.
I'm not sure that I really agree with that in Dash. I think I agree with that in GPU based cryptocurrencies, which have their own problems and issues. They're more vulnerable to 51% attacks generally because there's a large volume of GPUs available. But I think that is a strong argument for GPU mining because almost anyone with a laptop or a gaming computer can start mining and can start getting into the ecosystem. But the entry cost is so high with ASIC based mining that I don't think many people join an ecosystem anymore because they get to mine it. I think that's a very, very small minority.
Yeah, I suppose so. Now we're talking about a possible reallocation towards to kind of give more towards the higher heavy hitter as far as security is concerned, which is the proof of service masternode element, and taking that away from miners. Do we run into any risks that a increasingly smaller amount of money is going behind something that's absolutely critical for the network to operate? So, like, let's just say, in a crazy hypothetical, it would be like a 99% to masternodes and 1% to miners, of course, excluding the treasury. But you just get a very small, and you just have literally one guy with like a little ant miner in his basement running the entire, like, the backbone of the liveness of the network. And is there a problem if that gets too small, if you start paying too little to the mining thing, where then it just becomes easy for whoever to come in and just start messing with the mined element of it?
That's an interesting kind of point. I don't think I've thought about that too much. There probably is, maybe. I'm not sure. Ultimately, if there's only one person mining or whatnot, then it becomes very easy for other people to get into it because there's hash power there. There probably is a minimum percentage that you wouldn't really want to go below, and it would either become a zero or this minimum type of thing. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't want to go down to such a point where absolutely no one wants to mine except this one person.
Yeah, of
But
course.
even if it is a tiny percentage, um, it probably would be okay because that small percentage ends up it's still something, and if you're yeah, I'm not sure. There probably is a minimum percentage, probably around 10% to 5%, and I wouldn't want to go beneath that or just go to zero.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one consideration from that, I mean, 10 and 5% sounds pretty low, but also reasonable in this case. One other consideration, I guess, might be the hashing algorithm that might be used by other chains, whereas like Dash is super dominant on the X11 algorithm. But if it became so low that it wasn't dominant on the X11 algorithm anymore, maybe you start to run into more problems.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah. Now I've heard. I remember the entire the 45-45-10 split of Dash, right? 50-50 plus the Treasury was sort of, I would say, sacred, but was just like very written in stone for a long time. And then I remember at an open house in Phoenix, Brian Taylor, he used to be the CEO of the core team, he was talking about potential reallocation, and eventually a very conservative reallocation happened from the 50-50 to the 60-40, as we kind of already covered. But when they were discussing this whole thing, I remember hearing lots of different things thrown around as like possibilities. Like, well, we could do this, we could do that, we could go to pure proof of stake, we could do, and one other thing was a adding a staking class in addition. So now there'd be three entities other than the treasury, of course, getting paid on the network, which would be miners, stakers, and masternodes. And so, what do you think of that? The idea of adding in a staker, and what would really, so what are some of the things that would happen? I mean, obviously, the good thing about adding protocol level staking is it makes it much easier for people to earn on just like trustlessly on one dash. Like right now, you have to have 1,000 dash to run a masternode, and people use a trusted service such as CrowdNode to kind of get a piece of that if they have less of it. Or then there's some trustless or trust minimized stake like masternode solutions right now, but it's still like for the everyday holder, it's easier if there's a staking class. But hypothetically, how could that even work for consensus? Like, would you add like, how could you add in a staker element into the mix with masternodes for the purpose of Chainlocks and other security? And would it even be worth it?
Yeah, I think probably not. I I don't think that there is a good technical solution where you could have masternodes and stakers coexisting. I think the much better solution that we're actually in the process of designing right now, with the probable intention of developing as a V20 or V21 feature, is
And
a
so, real quick, so we're at V18, right?
yes. We are
And
current. We have released V18 and we are developing V19 right now.
yes, and V19 is what in the next few months, maybe? Is that kind of the time frame? Next 6 months?
The current timeline for V19, there are two primary features, BLS and asset locks, upgrade to the BLS version and asset locks. And both of those are roughly feature complete. Asset locks
Okay.
has a small amount of feature work still needed, and then testing. So testing is always the very difficult to estimate on timeline stuff, but I'm pretty confident that through January we will have released V19.
All right,
I'm
cool. So,
hoping
so
earlier than that, but I'm pretty confident.
yeah, it'll be nice. So sorry for the interruption on that. Just so people get like kind of where you're saying V20 or V21. So like maybe halfway into next year, or to the end of next year, or maybe early 24. Like so, just so people have an idea of like where this is in the overall scheme of things. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go on. So you're developing something in 20 or 21.
Yeah, so we're in the design process for a feature coming in either V20 or V21. Probably it's not set in stone, but probably for delivery in V20 or V21 for masternode shares that basically, and again, design is still in discussion, but allows people to very easily join a masternode share. Um, and the I, I'm not going to get too into it because design is still being debated pretty heavily internally, and we're still trying to figure out what kind of design we think would make the most sense. Um, but the rough idea is that from the Dash Core wallet, or even from a mobile wallet, you would be able to stake as easily as you can use CrowdNode on the Android wallet right now.
What are
And when I say
kind of
stake, I mean joining a Masternode share.
Yeah, and what are some of the kind of obviously it's still up in the air, right? It's still being designed, but what are some of the considerations of this? Like, for example, is there a minimum, like a 1 dash minimum, or would it be like 100 dash minimum, or like how does that part work? Or what are
Mm-hmm.
some of the things proposed? But also, how would that kind of work? What are some ways it could possibly work as far as forming a whole master, which is obviously, up to 1,000, it's 1,000 dash to own one. Would there be like a kind of like a delegated proof of stake type deal where you delegate your stake to a node, and if it is greater than or equal to 1,000, then that the master node is valid and then starts getting paid out? Or they're like other kind of, is it like some advanced multi-sig kind of thing, but just done way faster? Like what kinds of things are on the table?
Yeah, so the way that I think about it, and like I said, design is still up in the air, so all of this might change. But the way that I think about it is taking CrowdNode and making it so that they don't have custody of funds and it's incredibly easy to join, and kind of just make that fully very easy to do kind of a decentralized trustless masternode, but still having a relationship with the operator. So it is kind of a delegated proof of stake type system. Um, and basically, the way that I envision it is that you would say, I have a UTXO with 50 dash, and I am basically assigning that to CrowdNode, and they are able to use it in one of their master nodes to each 1,000 dash. Um, that is the rough idea of how I envision it. Um, there are some other ideas that Sam primarily is the kind of um, the father of. He kind of created a different scheme that probably would have um, a higher minimum amount of dash required, and there are some differences in kind of how he envisions it, and so that's what we're still kind of figuring out. But the gist is that if you had some minimum, that you would be able to join a masternode and start getting rewards.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of it's one of those things where when we're talking about, I believe the Zcash community are considering transitioning to proof of stake fully at some point. And it's funny because one of the key things that stuck out amongst the Electric Coin Company as far as things advantages of this is the ability to let everyone participate in governance, in consensus, and in getting the reward. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, like anyone can have a stake. It's so you have something like Decred, which is a hybrid proof of stake, proof of work system that also, it seems like, rather compared to Dash, has a much easier chance of anyone just staking something and getting money out of it. Whereas on the other hand, the master, it's purely a consensus and reward based system. As far as I know, they don't have anything similar to master nodes running some extra beefy kind of system, like, for example, upcoming Dash platform, as well as like instant send and things like that. So it's kind of like, because the masternode system has to do real work, it has to do a lot of cool stuff. It's kind of a little bit more limited in the open participation bit, which for smaller holders, which is kind of what gives this whole trustless share thing kind of a fun little wrinkle to it.
Yep.
Now, what do you think about? We're talking about the liveness and stuff like that, and what do you think are the prospects or like the benefits or whatever of having Dash go purely proof of stake at some point, instead of having the master nodes, vote on proposed blocks and lock them in, have the masters themselves just be proof of stake to propose the blocks themselves and then decide on it, and just turn it into a completely proof of stake system, and just shed the mining element entirely. Do you think that there's some benefits to doing that? Do you think that's a reasonable thing, or do you think it's a bad idea for other things? Just what are your thoughts?
Well, the biggest benefit is that you don't have to pay for mining anymore. And since you don't have to pay for mining, either the inflation could be reduced if you want to go that route, or it could increase the ROI for masternodes, which generally would draw in new people to the ecosystem, um, as the ROI acts as an incentive for people to join. Um, and so that's the big advantage of getting rid of proof of work. One of the other big advantages is that um, the chain would probably actually become faster to sync and handle. X11 is actually a relatively slow hashing algorithm, and we don't use it for a lot of stuff, but obviously we use it for proof of work and a couple other things in the block header and in the block header, I believe. So every block there are multiple X11 hashes that things like mobile clients and stuff like that have to do, and kind of getting rid of those and being able to go to something like SHA-256 or even SHA-3 that are faster and provide the same requirements as being a hash function and
Mm-hmm.
probably even better hash functions than X11 um, is another benefit. It would probably make mobile syncing better and faster. And it would also allow the network to have smaller more frequent blocks as needed,
Mm-hmm.
and even bigger blocks as needed. Um, yeah, there are a decent set of benefits with kind of removing proof of work. It's just a obviously very community consensus. There has to be clear community consensus around that kind of thing, and there is a high amount of technical effort that would have to be implemented.
Yeah, and obviously the liveness trade-offs, right? Of making it harder to, of making the chain stop easier, I guess, under super adverse circumstances.
Yeah, like we did talk about earlier, if a third of the network, basically, if a third of the master nodes go offline, the chain will almost certainly halt, um, and processing stops until stuff comes back online.
Yeah, interesting. So for kind of an interesting wrap-up question on this whole thing, I have I when I interviewed Justin Bonds about proof of stake, and he's more or less a proof of stake maxi, I guess. He kind of conceded the point that starting a proof of stake network from nothing is can present some interesting challenges because according to proof of stake, only people who are staking can receive block rewards. So the people with the initial money, like it has to be, I guess, start in a very centralized way, or you have to do some sort of a crowd sale or some sort of give. There's a few different ways of doing it, but basically, proof of work seems to be the gold standard for distributing the coin in the early days, and then just over time, mining kind of becomes more centralized and stuff. And so it seems like a lot of projects, like for example, Ethereum starting mined and then ending that way, Zcash starting mined and then going proof of stake as well, seems to be the way a lot of the more reliable, decentralized type projects tend to go. So, what do you think of this hypothetical? Like, if we were to launch a new coin or Dash from zero today, knowing all that we know, what do you think of a potential like gold standard type thing where you start as a 90% proof of work mine network with like a 10%, I guess, Chainlocks, for example, a masternode system. And then every year, the 90% goes down another 10% until finally you reach the 10% mining, 90% staked, or pure proof of stake at the end. Just go to zero in the mining. What do you think of that uh, hypothetical template?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, to kind of have a transition. I do definitely agree that it is very difficult to start a proof of stake network from scratch. And even just transitioning from a proof of work to a proof of stake system is definitely non trivial. Um, but having especially for starting a new system, probably starting out as some percentage proof of work definitely almost certainly makes sense. And migrating it over time um, could make sense, assuming that your goals are to get to proof of stake at some point.
Yeah. And so I like looking at the way this space is. Obviously, Bitcoin started out as pure proof of work and is still pure proof of work and will be probably forever. It kind of set the stage where everything else was a mined coin for a while. And then more and more things started implementing proof of stake. And now Ethereum was like the last big not Bitcoin that was on proof of work that now isn't. And obviously, when you have something that's like a little more like not all chains are equal in decentralization, and it's a lot of it's by design, right? You don't like, for example, like the Wax blockchain, which I use for a lot of my NFTs. You don't need that level of like extra strong security guarantees because it's a fun little NFT platform. It's not like the money that you need to survive on in adverse circumstances. So, do you think it might be realistic to assume or to hope for a model like this existing in the future for if you don't care too much about distribution stuff, just go straight proof of stake with like an ICO or something like that. But then if you want this to be like a super cool decentralized thing, do that 10-year plan where you start mostly mined and end up either mostly not mined or not at all mined.
Yeah, no, I do think that there are definitely varying levels of decentralization that are needed for different projects. Every single project doesn't have to be the ultimate in decentralization. But for some things, that's incredibly important, and having a good distribution is super important um, for those kind of projects.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So for kind of a wild card wrap up question, what is the single thing you're looking forward to most in Dash over the next year of development?
Well, one of the things that I've been working on quite a bit and pushing the core dev team towards is having more releases and having more iterative releases. This past month, maybe a month ago now, we released 18.1, which actually included quite a few new changes. And that's something I'm um, quite happy about doing more of.
And this is
Um,
not a hard fork, right? This was 18 was, but 18.1 was not. Is that correct?
yeah, exactly. Anything that is dot one or dot zero dot one or two, um, compared to the 18.0.0 of that like cycle, is never a hard fork. Hard forks have to be a new major version. Um, and so right now the next hard fork is going to be v19, but we released a 18.2.0 beta that might turn into a release candidate, that might turn into a final release. There are a couple of breaking changes with how wallets get loaded that I'm not sure if I want that to be a minor release or if I want to wait for version 19 with those set of changes. Um, but that's one of the things I'm more excited about is having these more iterative releases, and especially for uh, other teams within DCG to be able to test compatibility against Dash Core on a more iterative basis. I'm really excited about that. But even having external releases more often is something that I think is really valuable. And obviously, with V18, the release cycle was way too long. It was way longer than we wanted to. Testing took absolutely forever. And that's something we want to avoid by not having testing take forever, but also
Yeah.
have these more iterative releases that we can get out more frequently. So that's kind of more from the process side. Like it's not really like a new feature or something. It's just the process of how we get stuff released. One of the things that I personally am really excited about, but probably not many people from the community will be excited about,
Yeah.
is being able to use SQLite as the underlying database for wallets and different stuff like that. Right now we use Berkeley DB, but Berkeley DB has some significant performance issues on M1 based MacBooks, which is actually what I use most of the
Interesting.
time. I also use Fedora on my desktop, and it's much better on Fedora, but Berkeley DB hates M1 MacBooks and is incredibly slow. And so being able to use SQLite will make my development process significantly easier. So I'm very excited about that. And Kitty Whiskers is basically finalized on the development of that. Um, and so, yeah, probably not many people will care about that, but I really will. And it will also allow us to release native binaries for M1 MacBooks, where we haven't been able to do that yet. And then the next thing that is actually something that probably more people will care about
Yeah.
is hopefully Masternode shares. Again, that's something that we're working on the implementation or the design of right now. And we're working on finalizing that, and we'll end up creating a DIP and publishing that before implementation begins. But I think that's something that a lot of people really want, and will probably make a lot of people excited. So um, yeah, again, probably within the next year, that is the plan to get Masternode shares developed. And then anything else? Obviously, this isn't quite my team,
Of
but
course.
platform is one of the major things. And so asset locks is one of the features that we're working on. BLS is kind of related to it, but asset locks is necessary for moving funds back and forth between platform and the Dash 4 payment chain. Um, and so getting platform released and getting asset locks released, which will enable platform, is also a very important feature that's coming out in this next version.
All right. Fantastic. Well, where could people follow you and your stuff?
Yeah, so if you want to reach out and message me, I'm on the Discord, and I'm on both of the Dash Discords, so you can message me there if you want to kind of DM me. We post our release announcements on GitHub and on the forum, and so if you want to follow the releases, if you want to follow the development, you can look on GitHub. We're always looking for more community contributors. The Dash Incubator does have a recurring bounty for contributions that are made to Dash Core, and so you can get paid for your contributions, even if you don't work for DCG. And the GitHub is the primary spot to watch what we're doing. There's a lot of pull requests and issues going on there, and we try and make stuff as easy to understand there as we can and make everything viewable. And so there are a number of tracking issues for BLS and asset locks, which kind of outline where they are in their development and kind of what step they're on. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's basically it.
Well, fantastic. And I do see you're still on Twitter, although you don't tweet a whole lot.
I don't tweet much, no,
Machete
but I
don't
am
tweet.
there. No.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Thanks a bunch for being on, Pasta. It's been quite fascinating. And yeah, everyone, I'll see you guys next week.